Hello guys, welcome to today's class of the Ecology. My name is Dino and I'm going to talk to you today about biogeochemical processes in the nature. So let's start, it's a pretty vast lecture. So firstly, to explain that complex name of today's lecture, biogeochemical processes. So they are explaining how chemicals are cycling between biological part of the planet and geological ones. So how the matter is transferred from living through non-living part of planet and backward. So it's a process of recycling in most of these cases. So it's a cycling of matter from non-living to living things and back. Also, it's called a nutrient cycle. We consider four main processes in this biogeochemical cycle. It's a processes of five main chemicals that are enabling life to happen on our planet, and they are crucial for its survival in the different matter through different processes, but all of these five are important in their own way. So it's water, carbon, phosphorus, oxygen, and nitrogen cycle. We'll start with the water cycle because probably you consider that as the most important one. As for the most of the mentioned chemicals that we're going to talk about today, water has three main phases it can be on our planet. So it's liquid, solid, and gas. You probably know this. So these three phases are enabling water to go through all the parts of our planet through different environments and to move around depending on the place it is in the specific phase. So when we talk about cycling of the water, there are a few main processes that are allowing water to move around the earth. So it's evaporation, condensation, precipitation, infiltration, runoff, and subsurface flow. This is a scheme explaining the problem. This was supposed to work, but it's a video from YouTube, NASA's video, you can find it anyway, of a water cycle. This is more important what I wanted to tell you about. So the water cycle in general describes how water evaporates from one surface of the earth, rises into the atmosphere, cools and condenses into rain and snow in the clouds, and falls again to the surface as precipitation. The water falling on the land collects in rivers and lakes and so on, and also through pores on the rocks goes under the ground, and much of it flows back into the ocean where it will once more evaporate. The cycling of water in and out of the atmosphere is a significant aspect of the weather patterns of Earth. For example, wind has a big influence in the water cycle. Just to explain in more detail on this picture, so here let's consider this as the ocean, since the ocean is probably 97% of water storage on our planet. We can start there. So you have water, the ocean filled with water. So when the sun radiation comes on the surface of Earth, it heats up water, which evaporates and ends up in the atmosphere. When it rises, it cools down. At one point, it forms clouds. Clouds travel through huge distances over the planet, transferring water from big water masses like oceans to the land, and the great role in this is played by winds. So when at some point the clouds are cooled down, and from the water and liquid phase, it's formed like drizzle or rain or snow or ice. So it's getting heavier, and by the transfer of gravitation, they are falling back on the ground. So this is water evaporation. This condensation in the in the shape of clouds, which can travel long distances, and we are here in the moment of precipitation. So there are a few options of precipitation. It can fall down as a snow, and what happens in one of the options is that snow that falls on the high mountains is saved there or accumulated in the matter of internal snow or ice, which can be there for a long period, but at some point it also melts at least at some level, and the water in a liquid phase is again it's back in the water cycle. So when the water is melted, it can form like runoffs or streams or rivers and so on, lakes. And then it travels through the ground. So here we have rivers and lakes. Important to mention is that through all this time, water is evaporating. Water basically evaporates on every temperature till 0 degrees Celsius. So through its whole process, some part is, quoting, lost back to the atmosphere. So traveling through the land, water can soak the ground, and then it can form like underground, like this ground discharges. It can be underground lakes or rivers, but at some point they will also end up in the huge water masses like oceans or seas. But what is also important is that when the water is soaked in the ground, it gets enriched by minerals and other matters, which helps plants survive. So plants use water from the ground, and then they are using it in the matter of photosynthesis. And at some point in the process, they transpire it back in the atmosphere, also in the form of gas, which call that process the transpiration. Also, interception loss happens through the process as well. One of the interesting options for water is to get really deep in the ground and get in the contact. It's not in this picture, but it's volcanoes which heats it up, and then water penetrates the crust, but how it's really heated up is it forms geysers or volcano streams coming back on the Earth's surface. That's the main idea of the water cycle on the globe. Next, we're going to talk about carbon cycle. Carbon is tightly related to water cycle in the nature, because in the process of photosynthesis, it's produced by plants. It's as water, it can be found in any part of a planet, but only in different shape. So in the air, it can be found as carbon dioxide. In water, it's like H2CO3, like a bicarbonate, and in the ground, it's like natural gas or petrol and so on. You're familiar with that. Usually, by living creatures, it's used from CO2 as a main source of a carbon. Some part of a CO2 in the process is locked in the ground, as you can see here, the coal, but otherwise it's coming from decomposing the raw materials of living things by decomposers like fungi and bacteria, and then it goes back to the process of cycling. It's used by photosynthesis actually, or a process of respiration where the oxygen is used and CO2 is produced. Also, the sources of CO2 can be volcanoes or physical burning of the coal, as we said, the fossil fuels. And mostly it's used from CO2 in the atmosphere. The more interesting is the water cycle of the carbon, where you have photosynthesis and respiration, which are in a cycle using and producing CO2. It can also be considered as a consumption in the moment of a respiration. CO2 dissolves in the water really quickly, so the hotter the water is, it dissolves faster. And what an important role is it increases also the solubility of a hydrogen molecule, which plays a great role in the acidification of the water. So the more CO2, the water is more sour, the pH is lower, which some ocean creatures are really sensitive to, and that's the one part of increasing CO2 level in the atmosphere, the bad side of it. The other side of it is the greenhouse effect, because atmospheric CO2 reduces the reflection of sunlight entering the atmosphere, and the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere results in the climate change, the rise of the temperature overall on the planet. Next, let's talk about phosphorus. So phosphorus is usually found in the shape of a phosphate, and it plays a few really important roles, usually in forming a structure of important elements like desoxyribonucleic acid and so DNA and RNA, and this is a phosphate backbone. The backbone CPs here and here a main role in forming the DNA and RNA in all living things as we know it. Next to it, it is also forming the ATP, and ATPs are what's called an energy monad in all life forms. They're energy carriers, allowing organisms to live and to grow. Also, important thing to know is that 80% of it is in humans is found in teeth and bones, but in combination with some metal ions, also important combination, it forms some minerals in the ground like this one. For example, it's turquoise. Still, the biggest storage of phosphorus on Earth can be found in the sedimentary rocks. So it's basically forming the really high mountains. Contrary to other biogeochemical cycles we mentioned before of different elements, the Phosphorus cycle does not include the gas stage. So under the temperature and the pressure on Earth, it really rarely ends up in the gas form. As in this case of the phosphorus, the atmosphere is playing a little role in its cycling. And when it does end up in the atmosphere, it leads to acid rains. So this would be the scheme of a phosphorus cycling. So we mentioned that the biggest amount of the phosphorus on this planet is in these sedimentary rocks, and this is exactly where the phosphorus cycle is starting. When it rains, the water actually washes up and removes it from the rocks via a process that is called weathering. It ends up in the ground. It can be by water transferred to deeper water or to stay in the soil. And when it's in the soil, the plants take up those phosphates ions from the soil. We have a plant taking the phosphate soils from the ground, and it's all on plants onwards. So the phosphates then move from plants, which use them to process of photosynthesis and so on, or to form their own proteins. It moves from plants to herbivores, and then from herbivores to carnivores, which would indirectly eat the plant, so still having their own source of phosphorus. When the phosphorus gets back in the cycle is when the plant or animal dies. So it's the decomposer's work to put it back from the organic to non-organic shape, when it can again be used by some other plant. So what also can happen is that after long periods, the phosphor can get locked in the ground and to form sedimentary rocks by a process called sedimentation. And then at some point, what happens is this geological uplift. So if decomposers do not reach it at the right moment, it can get piled up. It's so-called sedimentation, forming some kind of soil, and in the ground movement, it comes to this geological uplift, forming the high mountain, and that's when the the cycle is starting all over again through erosion and the weathering by rain. Okay, I hope we had fun explaining this. It was fun for me, I know. Thank you for watching and see ya in some of the next presentations. Ciao!